Hello, everyone. Today on the Founder's Code, we're diving into the incredible story of how a kid from humble beginnings went on to create Nike. You won't want to miss this. This is a story about a kid named Phil Knight who grew up poor in a city called Portland. It was so bad that his family had to collect discarded boxes and sell them as scrap metal just to get by. Despite the situation he grew up in, Phil did everything he could to have a better life. He excelled at school and sports. He even became the captain of the basketball team. But even though he got a scholarship to college, that wasn't enough for his family, who still struggled to make ends meet. So after graduating, Phil went to work for his father's company, which specialized in accounting for small businesses. And although it was a respectable job, it paid very little. So he needed to do something on the side. At night, he took classes to get certified in marketing, and then he started doing marketing for other people. Soon he was making so much money doing this that he quit his job and focused on his new business. But soon after that, he got an idea so crazy that it would change his life forever. Phil was traveling the world for work when he hit Japan and got hooked on the most popular sport, soccer. And at that moment, he had a realization. There was no way he could compete with brands like Adidas, Puma, and Reebok. But maybe he could create a brand of his own. So when he returned to America, he bought a ticket to Mexico where he met with several shoe manufacturers and struck a deal. They'd make 500 pairs of shoes for him, and unsold ones could be returned. So it was a risk-free opportunity. And when he returned home, he started selling the shoes from the trunk of his car to local track athletes. He drove around the country doing this, and eventually he sold out every single pair. But the problem was the shoes were not designed for running. They were actually designed for soccer. So although he made some money, it wasn't enough to keep going. Then suddenly, a month later, one of the biggest newspapers in America published an article about Phil's unique business. Overnight, he went from having 0 customers to being bombarded with orders. He didn't know how to handle it all, but luckily he had a friend named Bill Bowerman, who was a track coach at the University of Oregon. And although he knew nothing about the shoe business, he had experience managing large teams. So he became Phil's partner. Together, they hired employees and rented a warehouse, and within a year, they had grown the business 14 times. However, there was one major problem. You see, in the beginning, Phil just wanted to flip shoes for a quick profit, which is why he never registered the trademark for the brand name. And now that they were growing exponentially, bigger companies were starting to take notice. First, Reebok sent him a cease and desist letter because they also had a shoe called the Freestyle. Then Adidas sent him one too because they also had a shoe called the Cortez. And as you can imagine, Phil was terrified. His lawyer told him he only had 2 options. Either change the name of the brand or prepare for a lengthy legal battle that could put the company out of business. So what did he do? Well, he changed the name to Nike. And if you're wondering why he chose that name, it's because Nike is the Greek goddess of victory. And Phil wanted the shoes to help people feel like they had just won a victory. And although the rebranding was a success, things soon started to fall apart. You see, although Phil's business partner, Bill, helped him manage the operations, he didn't really understand the vision Phil had for the company. In fact, he thought that selling shoes was a low-margin business that wasn't going anywhere. So he kept telling Phil to slow down and be more conservative, but Phil wanted more. He was obsessed with taking the company public, which meant that Bill would be able to cash out his shares and retire. But the problem was, they weren't quite ready yet. Their sales were great, but their profits were terrible. But instead of fixing that, Bill pressured Phil to open a second warehouse and expand the business even further. However, he warned Phil that if anything went wrong, they would lose their shirt. And guess what happened? Their inventory management was a disaster. Customers complained that they received the wrong products and the company couldn't afford to pay its bills. Eventually, they even had to ask their bank for a loan to stay afloat. Although they were able to make it work in the end, Phil realized that Bill was holding him back. So he asked him to buy out his share of the company for $500,000. Initially, Bill refused, but when he found out that Phil had a buyer lined up, he agreed. And this turned out to be the best decision of his life because within a year, Nike stock went public at $27 per share. And by the end of the day, Bill's $500,000 was now worth $137 million. However, this wasn't the case for everyone. Even though the IPO made Nike a billion-dollar company overnight, it also made Phil a lot of enemies. You see, prior to the IPO, he gave away hundreds of pairs of shoes to athletes for free. But after the IPO, he stopped because he didn't want to look like he was playing favorites. One of those athletes was a famous track star named Steve Prefontaine, who was furious when he found out that Phil had cut him off. He said, "You used to give me 10 pairs of shoes every month. Now you won't even give me a damn toenail clipper." Then he ripped up his old Nikes and started wearing Adidas. But that wasn't the worst part, because in the early 1980s, there was a recession in America and Nike's sales plummeted. For 3 years straight, the company lost money and it looked like they might go bankrupt. So Phil had to make a move to save the company. But before he could do that, he first had to solve a problem within the company. You see, when Nike was a small company, everyone worked hard and did their best. But now that it was a huge corporation, many of the employees didn't care. People showed up late, left early, took long lunches, and played games all day. To fix this, Phil hired a man named Tom Clark, who was known for turning around failing companies. And his first order of business was to fire lazy employees. He started with the receptionist, who was often late and left early, and then he fired the head of manufacturing for falling asleep at his desk. Finally, he went to Phil and told him that he had to fire his best friends, Sandy and Mary, because they weren't pulling their weight. And even though it was extremely difficult, Phil trusted Tom's judgment and did it anyway. Then he launched a massive advertising campaign that defined Nike's brand and led to the company's resurgence. Unfortunately, though, he was unable to enjoy the success because he had just narrowly avoided a lawsuit that could have destroyed the company. You see, Nike was supposed to manufacture shoes for the 1984 Olympics, but a few months before the event, they informed the committee that they were unable to produce the shoes on time. The committee was furious and threatened to sue Nike for breach of contract unless they could prove that they made a genuine attempt to deliver the shoes. Luckily, Tom Clark had recorded every conversation with the Olympic Committee, so it was easy to clear their name. But this was a wake-up call for Phil. He realized that he couldn't focus on growing the business. Someone else had to take over, and he had to focus on protecting what they had built. So he stepped down as CEO, but he still owned 51% of the company, which meant that he still had a lot of power. He used this power to hire more experienced executives, which helped grow the company even further. But then something unexpected happened. The CEO retired after 5 years, and Phil was asked to return as CEO. And although he was hesitant at first, he accepted the position. Then he made a decision that would turn the company into an iconic brand. You see, before he took over, Nike primarily sold to sporting goods stores like Foot Locker and Champs. But he decided to take a risk and start selling directly to consumers. This meant that Nike had to build distribution centers, hire salespeople, set up retail locations, and open factories. It was incredibly expensive and risky, but it ended up working. Today, Nike is a multi-billion-dollar company with tens of thousands of employees, and they've become one of the most iconic brands of all time. I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on Nike? Comment below. Also, remember to subscribe if you haven't yet. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.